Hi everyone, my name is Inés, and together with Victor Estal and Maria Jesus Frojan, I'm here, and thanks to the CaixaBank Foundation, I'm here to present this talk. And yeah, folks, I'm aware that we are the ones of the weird talk, because we are here to do a conceptual analysis of mental disorders. But you know, as a neuroscientist that happens to be quite interested in philosophy, I can sadly say that we cannot get rid of philosophy when doing science, because even if we just decide to ignore it, we are going to be like conceptualizing what we study somehow. So that's why it's totally worth it to spend some time reflecting on what we are studying. And in here, we are going to be reflecting on what we mean when we say that someone is mentally ill, right? Or that someone has a mental disorder. So basically, the idea is that the issue is that psychiatry is facing some problems, like the problems of their diagnosis, the high heterogeneity or comorbidity. And because of that, some authors had started to consider or to talk about the conceptualization that we are doing of mental disorders. And that's how some authors had offered a neurocentric conceptualization, which means understanding mental disorders as precisely brain disorders. This means that as it happens with neurological disorders, we would be having a brain alteration underneath the symptoms that causes them, right? So if this was actually the case, we need to meet three requirements. First of all, if mental disorders are for real, like brain disorders, as it happens with neurological disorders, first of all, we need to encounter a brain alteration for every single mental disorder. Secondly, we need to say that that brain alteration is a brain malfunction. And thirdly, we need to say that that brain alteration has a causal role over the symptoms we are observing. If this was actually the case, then neurology would absorb psychiatry and clinical psychology because the three fields would be studying the same. However, this doesn't seem to be the case because there are some problems with this conceptualization. First of all, regarding that we need to encounter a brain alteration, some authors had said what we are all kind of observing in labs, right? That the ones that we work with mental disorders, which is that despite decades of research, we haven't been able to encounter a brain alteration for every single diagnosis, right? And you can still say, okay, Inés, but this is just a matter of time. With more time and better techniques, we would be able to encounter brain alterations for every disorder, right? So let's just take that for the sake of argument, and let's assume that it's actually the case. Still, the second point is problematic, because we need to say that that brain alteration is a brain malfunction. And we can't say that. And here we can introduce the work of the neuroscientist Mark Lewis. He works on addiction, and he basically explains how the brain disease model doesn't work on addiction, because the changes that an addicted brain has are the same that a brain that learns a deep habit has. So if we don't want to say that someone that falls in love has a malfunctioning brain, we cannot say that someone that has an addiction has a malfunctioning brain, right? But still, some of you guys can say like, okay, yeah, whatever, we cannot say that it's a brain malfunction, but what's the big deal of that, right? Still, we have a third problem, which is quite important, because we cannot say that the brain alteration has a causal role. In here, we are all, well, as some authors had pointed out, we are all familiar with the concept of neuroplasticity, right? Brains are supposed to change because of experience. So this means that even if in some conditions, brains have a causal role over the symptoms, sometimes brain also change because of experience. So for instance, when you have a lower level of, for instance, like serotonin, that might be not the cause of you not leaving the bed, but maybe the consequence of it, right? So because of all these reasons, we think that this conceptualization is just not correct, and we have an alternative one to offer, which is in line with behavior analysis, which is this one. So the idea would be understanding mental disorders as a network of symptoms that are caused by a learning process whose long-term consequences are unadapted. And yeah, folks, the learning process is in red because that's the important thing. Because while in neurological disorders, learning processes are not playing a causal role, in mental disorders they are. So to see this with an example, for instance, we have agoraphobia that appears in the DSM. So the idea would be that we have some symptoms. They conform a network because they influence to each other. And the idea is that these symptoms are a consequence of a learning process. If the learning process is long enough or strong enough, they can influence the brain, but the brain alteration is going to be always the consequence rather than the cause, right? It would be the same with anorexia. Again, we have like symptoms, and then like they conform a network. And the idea would be that maybe in short term, it's positive in the sense that you have low self-esteem, you start to like get thinner and you feel better because it influences your self-esteem, right? But in long term, this is going to conform this network that it's going to be unadapted, right? So then to summarize, we have like two possible conceptualizations, the neurocentric view, the three requirements that are not met, and the learning view, for which these requirements don't constitute a problem. First of all, the learning view would say that the brain alteration would depend on how long and strong the learning process is. The learning view would say that the brain is not malfunctioning at any moment, that the long-term consequences of the symptoms are the ones that are unadapted. And finally, the learning view would say that the brain alteration is the consequence, that the learning process is actually the cause. Just some final considerations. What we are not saying with this view is that mental disorders are under voluntary control or that are easily changed or modified. We can all agree that I have learned Spanish, and however, I feel that it would be quite difficult, if not impossible, for me to unlearn Spanish, right? With this, we are not saying either that biology or the brain are unimportant. We are just saying that they have a different role than what they have in neurology. And finally, we are not saying that all mental disorders that have been traditionally considered as such belong in this new conceptualization, because it might be the case that some of them are actually neurological problems. What we are saying is that at least some of them cannot be understood from this view. And well, some questions for debate that we can have after. We can talk if it's appropriate to talk about symptoms if there's no an underlying biological cause. We can talk about animal models, because if learning processes are so important, maybe animal models need to model also these learning environments. And finally, we can talk about pharmacology as a treatment, because if the learning is the problem, then the solution is learning something. So pharmacology, if it's a solution, it needs to be in line with these learning processes, right? So well, thank you for your attention. If we convinced you, like, that's fine. You can contact us and we can discuss over this. And if we didn't convince you, please come along and let's continue discussing. Thank you so much.